This company manufactures 5,000 vehicles a month, for that is the number it can sell domestically. The factory is geared to produce another 2,000. It has a vital interest in seeing the general standard of life in the nation improved, and so do all the other millions of people involved in the industrial boom of southern Brazil. The revolution that tossed out Goulart and set up a cry for economic and social reform had some of its strongest backing in the South. Factory workers, like industrialists, wanted to see production continue. They wanted to see it expand. They saw Goulart's confused administration as a menace to this. What remains to be seen is how far the South will be able to perceive the deeper confusions and inequities that cry for change. Will they realize that their own welfare is linked to that of less fortunate people in their own nation? It is hard to say. The industrial explosion of the South has acquired great impetus. Grant them the best will in the world. Have there been enough changes in social structure there to carry the rest of the country forward? American Ambassador Lincoln Gordon.
Oh, indeed. Indeed, it has changed enormously. You have only to visit a city like Sao Paulo, which is a city of now almost 5 million people, with very modern industry. You have only to see smaller cities like Belo Horizonte, Porto Alegre in the far south, Curitiba, even Recife, with all of the difficulties that exist in the northeast. And you see in the urban side, and not so much yet in the rural side, but on the urban side, you see a process of very rapid modernization taking place, the development of a true middle class. In fact, it was this true middle class which was largely responsible for the revolution of late March 1964. Brazil is very much a country in motion. And the notion that it has a distant future before it, but something that will never be realized, I think is an entirely mistaken notion.
The highways around Sao Paulo match the pace and stature of the city. But to put Sao Paulo into perspective, to grasp how industrialization relates to the rest of the country, all one has to do is proceed far enough from the city on any road. The further you get from the metropolis, the more the roads deteriorate. Roads in general may well serve as collective symbol for one of the gravest ailments of the nation, failure of communication. This operates on many levels. On a very basic social level, it appears impossible for town to communicate with country. The middle-class revolution that put in a government dedicated to reform was rooted in the towns. But some of the sharpest needs are rooted in the country. Town and country view each other with suspicion. These gauchos in the frontier cattle region of Rio Grande do Sul will look at an outsider the way an old-fashioned Texan might look at a Yankee. Naturally, the poor states hate the rich states. The people of Ceará or Pernambuco, who have to buy tools or farm equipment from Sao Paulo, scream that they're being made to pay for superhighways down south when they can't even afford to improve their own dirt roads. And behind the famous Brazilian amiability, there stands a cynicism about human nature that works to block change. They do not expect too much of the other fellow. It makes it easier to get on with him, but harder to help him. There are many people who need help, most particularly in the rural areas. These gauchos stand to gain if agricultural efficiency is improved, and their gain is bound to be the nation's gain. There are men at the center who see these things, who see what ought to be done, but to spread the word, to turn knowledge into action, is very difficult. Jose Arthur Rios, professor of sociology at the Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro. Is perhaps land reform the key to progress?
In Brazil, I think so. I think it is the first step to a very solid process of industrialization, a continuous process of industrial growth. Industrialization in Brazil is closely connected with agrarian reform. In other words, if you don't have a good distribution of land, you won't have an internal market. You won't have high levels of consumption, which will allow for a good, solid, continuous process of industrialization. If an agrarian reform is not done in Brazil, we might have industrialization, but dealing with luxurious products and aiming at the wealth of a few people.
Well, that wouldn't be total industrialization, as the word is usually used, then, would it be?
That's right, but that's the kind of industrialization in oligarchic countries, in countries which are marked by an oligarchic structure. If we want to have a democratic structure in Brazil, we have to change our agrarian structure and to allow for a larger amount of consumers and the raising of the levels of living of the rural population. In the rural population is the future of our industrial market.
In the meantime, these telephone lines, torn down by peasants angry over their inability to communicate their needs, hang idle, waiting for someone to take the bold steps that are needed. Brazilians do not lack in boldness. For a long time, the empty center of the land has stood as a nagging reminder of the nation's inability to pull itself together and realize its potential. In the 1950s, the government, under President Juscelino Kubitschek, decided to put long-term plans into effect and move the capital of the nation into the middle of the country. The result? Brasilia. Arguments raged about this move and will no doubt continue. It was called senseless extravagance, insane egotism, impractical. Moderates said that the move might be a good one, but the time was not right. It was too soon. But the men behind Brasilia pushed it through, and the official capital of the nation was moved there. They claimed it fulfilled a spiritual need of the people. Certainly, the place does seem like an aggressive step into the future. There are almost no private dwellings. Congressmen and government employees live in graceful blocks of reinforced concrete apartments grouped into communities. There are supposed to be no crossroads in Brasilia, and areas where one might walk are grouped. Each nest of apartment blocks has its own schools, its own shops. For the rest, it is expected that one will move in automobiles or by buses. And the city continues to grow. It seems a long way away from the dusty, bureaucratic corridors of the old capital, Rio de Janeiro. Brasilia may well come to serve as capital in the same way that Washington, D.C. stands as spiritual center for Americans. Certainly a great many people come to look it over, just as they do to inspect our capital. And there's no arguing with the proposition that Brazilians need everything they can get to pull them together, to give them a feeling of a new start. The The congressmen who roll up to the assembly halls in their limousines are coming to meet an unprecedented challenge. They are all of them members of the educated elite, for the 50% of the Brazilian people who are illiterate have no vote and are not directly represented. The congressmen are most of them comfortably off, many of them fond of the old ways. Many of them have interests or stand close to men who have interests that will be directly harmed by any program of reform. And yet, they are all called to discuss such revolutionary steps as collecting taxes, redistributing land, restricting credit, getting rich states to help poor ones, building thousands of low-cost houses, thousands of schools, more colleges, more hospitals, more roads, more everything that is needed, and curbing inflation to boot. President Castelo Branco has asked a lot of these men. It has been strongly implied that if the Congress does not act, if they delay reform by debate, the Army will feel it necessary to step in again. The challenge has been clearly drawn. By reason of its size alone, Brazil is the most influential nation in Latin America. If Brazil fails to prosper, the ideals and interests of the whole hemisphere will be put in danger. But if the general condition of the people is improved, Brazil will prosper. There is very little vocal opposition to the reform programs of the new government. The strongest thing said against them is that they are trying to do what the United States wants them to do. Does this charge make any sense? Minister of Planning Roberto Campos.
I think this charge is extremely unfair. The government is pursuing the course that it thinks best for the development of Brazil. For instance, correcting inflation is not certainly an act of submission either to the dictates of the International Monetary Fund or of the US government or European governments. It results from the fact that inflation last year attained the rate of 80%, which means that at the end of the year the salaries were at 20% of what they were at the beginning. Now, no economy can survive such a dismal situation. So we are correcting inflation. We are seeking to reactivate the inflow of foreign investment, not because we particularly love foreign investment, but because we do not have enough savings, and we want to supplement our savings with the importation of foreign capital.
What will happen to Brazil if these steps are taken? Reynold Carlson.
Brazil is, by definition, not a poor country. It has resources. And in the development of these resources, it will achieve a standard of living. Oh, in 10 years, Brazil ought to be equal to Italy. In 25 years, Brazil ought to be equal to France in terms of its resources, its level of living, and especially its position in world affairs.
Brazil has great prosperity and world leadership within its grasp. Like many Latin American countries, its worst enemy is its own past. Unlike some, its best friend is its own future, if the men of power in Brazil can unite in seeing what that future should be.